Jesuits also had success, however, in the nation of China, also adopted the local silk dress of Chinese noblemen, especially the scholars, through the work of such men as Matteo Ricci and Michel Ruggieri in the year 1589. It said that these men brought new languages, they brought knowledge of astronomy, they brought mathematics, they brought things like clocks and watches, books, maps, and musical instruments to the Chinese, many of whom had never seen these things or never knew how they could properly be applied. So they didn't just bring with them the gospel message, they actually showed how an orderly and logical God actually changes the way that you approach the world, actually affects how we can worship Him through incredible things such as musical instruments and especially music theory. Not only that, but they made new maps for the Chinese, they corrected astronomical calculations for the Chinese, they reformed the calendar for them, they even made superior canon for the Chinese army, all the time explaining the gospel using various references from ancient Chinese texts, so the Chinese saw a common story in the gospel that connected to all of their old ideas. That's why the gospel and the church was so successful in China, because the Jesuits not only did that, but they even translated parts of the scripture. They made a worship that was written in Chinese. This has had an incredible effect and is one of the many reasons why the Jesuits were so successful in these other nations. It was something that would not actually come to an end until, unfortunately, the early 18th century, when the Vatican, wanting to take greater control over the Jesuits, began to forbid things like the scriptures and worship being in native languages, or began to forbid things like the peoples of these other areas having their own pastors. That's really what caused an end of the church in these places. But that, of course, would come back in terms of missions, because as I mentioned earlier, the Victorians would bring it back in the 19th century.